My wife cheated for months and planned to steal millions, but when she went to court, she found out my mother protected everything years before, and she only got $200K while I kept my entire business. I'm 35 years old. I run a tech consulting company that I built from scratch. And about 6 months ago, I discovered that my wife wasn't just cheating on me, but had basically planned to destroy me financially. Sounds dramatic. I know. But when I say this woman had a complete plan to take half of everything I'd worked for over 10 years, I'm not exaggerating even a little bit. The thing is, she didn't count on me being smarter than her. Or, well, my mother being smarter, but I'll get to that. Let me start from the beginning, because you need to understand how we got to this point. I met Isabella about 4 years ago at a networking event. You know, one of those boring ones where everyone pretends to be interested in what you do while looking for useful contacts. She worked in public relations for a mid-sized firm. She was smart, attractive, had that ambitious person energy that I liked from the start. We dated for 2 years before getting married, and honestly, everything seemed perfect, or at least that's what I thought. I guess I should have paid more attention to certain signs, but when you're in love or whatever I was, you don't see the red flags until they hit you in the face. My business was already doing well when I met her. I'd been building it for about 6 years, going from being a lonely freelancer working from my apartment to having a small office with 5 employees. By the time we got married, it had grown quite a bit more. We had about 15 people on payroll and contracts with some important companies. Isabella always said she was proud of me, that she admired my work ethic and my vision, all those things you want to hear from your partner. A few months after the wedding, she quit her job in public relations. She told me she was tired of the corporate environment, that she wanted to focus on other things. Maybe start her own business eventually. I didn't have a problem with that. Honestly, the business generated enough money for both of us, and if she needed a break, well, fine, right? Looking back, I should have seen it coming. The first few months after she quit her job were normal, I guess. She spent time at home, said she was exploring business ideas, taking online courses, that kind of thing. I kept working like crazy because that's how this world is. If you slack off for a second, you fall behind. I traveled quite a bit for client meetings. Sometimes I'd be away for 2 or 3 days, and she never complained. I mean, at least not directly. But about 6 months after she quit her job, I started noticing something was off. I can't point to exactly what was first, but it was like a change in the atmosphere, you know? She was more distant, less interested in what I did, less affectionate in general. When I'd ask her if everything was okay, she always said yes, that she was just stressed thinking about what to do with her life, and I like an idiot believed her and tried to give her space. This continued for months, like 8 or 9. Months where she was increasingly cold toward me. It got to the point where we basically lived like roommates who shared a bed but nothing else. I tried to talk to her, to ask her what was going on, but she always found an excuse. She was tired, had a headache, needed time for herself. I started thinking that maybe I'd made a mistake getting married so quickly, that maybe I didn't know her as well as I thought. But never. And when I say never, I mean it seriously. Did it cross my mind that she might be cheating on me, and much less that she had an elaborate plan to rob me? The day I discovered everything was completely by accident. It was a normal Tuesday. I'd come home early from the office because I had to review some contracts at home and needed to print documents. Isabella wasn't there. She'd supposedly gone out for coffee with a friend. Her laptop was on the living room table, open, and I don't know what made me look, but I saw she had Facebook Messenger open, and there were new messages from someone named Tyler. I didn't recognize the name, but something in my stomach churned. I know I shouldn't have looked, that it's invasion of privacy and all that, but something told me I needed to know what was going on, so I sat down and started reading. The first messages I saw were from the day before, and were basically Tyler saying how much he missed being with her. That the night before had been incredible. That kind of thing that makes you feel like you've been kicked in the stomach. I started scrolling up, reading more and more messages, and with each line I read, I felt like my whole world was falling apart. They'd been talking for months. Months. From before she started being distant with me, there were photos they'd sent each other, explicit messages, plans for meetups. But what really left me frozen was when I got to a conversation from about 2 months ago, where they were talking specifically about me and my business. Isabella had written to Tyler. And I remember this word for word because I read it about 10 times without being able to believe it. Something like how her idiot husband, meaning me, had a business that was easily worth a couple million and that she was entitled to half if they got divorced. Tyler responded asking if she was sure about that, and she explained that she'd been researching marriage laws and that since they'd gotten married after the business already existed but it had grown significantly during the marriage, she could claim the growth as shared property. Then there were messages where they basically planned how she was going to ask me for a divorce, hire an aggressive lawyer, and divide the assets. She even told Tyler that with her share they could go away together to another city and start over. I sat there, I don't know how long, just reading and rereading those messages. I felt a bunch of things at the same time, you know? Rage, sadness, betrayal, but also something I didn't expect, which was almost like relief. Because at least now I knew what the hell was going on, why she'd been so distant. It wasn't that I'd done something wrong or that our marriage simply didn't work, it was that she was a damn manipulator who had planned all this. I took out my phone and started taking photos of the messages, all the ones I could, especially the ones where they talked about the divorce plan and the money. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do with them, but something told me I was going to need them. When Isabella got home about 2 hours later, I was sitting on the couch waiting for her. She came in all smiling, gave me a kiss on the cheek like nothing was wrong, and asked me how my day had been. I looked at her and said, "We need to talk about Tyler. You should have seen her face." She literally turned pale in a second. She tried to play dumb, asking who Tyler was, but I told her to drop the act because I'd seen her messages. That's when she immediately got defensive, yelling about how dare I go through her private things, that it was an invasion, that I had no right. I told her I didn't give a damn about her privacy when she'd been planning to destroy me. We argued for hours that night. She eventually admitted to the affair, but tried to justify it, saying I was never home, that I cared more about the business than about her, that she felt lonely and abandoned. The whole classic cheater story trying to flip things to be the victim. When I mentioned the messages about the divorce plan and the money, her tone changed completely. Suddenly, she was no longer the hurt and misunderstood wife, but got direct and cold. She told me yes, she was going to ask for a divorce, and yes, she expected to receive what she was entitled to for having been by my side while the business grew. I responded that she hadn't been by my side in anything, that she'd quit her job by her own decision and hadn't contributed absolutely nothing to the business. She insisted that her emotional support and her presence counted, that she deserved half of everything. The thing is, Isabella was so sure of her plan, so confident that she had it all figured out, that when I told her things weren't going to be as simple as she thought, she laughed in my face. She literally laughed and said she'd spoken with lawyers informally, that she knew exactly what her rights were, that there was nothing I could do to prevent her from taking her share. I just smiled and told her, well, we'll see. That night I slept at the office because I couldn't stand being in the same house as her. But the next few days were chaos. Isabella hired a lawyer immediately, like one of those who specialize in contentious divorces and have a reputation for being aggressive. I also hired mine, of course, and we started the mediation process, which is basically where both parties try to reach an agreement before going to court. The first session was surreal. We were sitting in this cold corporate conference room, Isabella with her lawyer on one side, me with mine on the other, and a mediator trying to keep everything civilized. Isabella's lawyer presented her demands, which basically included half the value of the business, half our savings, and spousal support for 2 years, because she'd left her career to support me. It was all so absurd, I had to restrain myself from laughing. My lawyer, who knew exactly what the real situation was, let them finish their presentation before dropping the bomb. He said something like, "It's interesting that Mrs. Isabella claims rights to a business of which she is not the owner, nor has ever been." Isabella's lawyer looked at him confused and asked what he meant. My lawyer then explained that the business, all the assets, the corporate account, everything was legally registered in my mother Patricia's name, and had been for years. Isabella looked at me like I'd grown a second head, and I can tell you that seeing her expression of absolute shock was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. Let me explain what had happened. My mother is a smart businesswoman. She herself has her own investments and properties, and when I started growing the business years ago, she advised me about protecting assets. It wasn't anything illegal or shady. We simply structured everything so that technically she was the owner of the business, and I was the CEO and employee. This has tax benefits and also, as it turned out to be very convenient, protects against divorces and lawsuits. I received a generous salary from the business, of course, but the assets and real value of the company were in my mother's name. We did this about 5 years before I met Isabella. It wasn't something I did, anticipating she was going to betray me. It was simply good business planning. Isabella went hysterical in that mediation session. She started screaming that this was fraud, that I'd hidden assets, that it wasn't fair. Her lawyer tried to calm her down while reviewing the documents. The lawyer had brought documents that clearly showed the structure had existed long before Isabella and I met. Technically, I didn't own almost anything significant. My salary was good but not millionaire level, and the only thing considered marital property was our house, which we'd bought together after getting married, and our shared savings, which honestly weren't that much, because I reinvested most of my earnings in the business, or kept it in accounts that were also structured in a protected way. The mediation ended abruptly that day because Isabella couldn't stop screaming, and her lawyer needed time to review everything more thoroughly. During the following weeks, Isabella basically dedicated herself to making my life impossible. She posted vague things on social media about manipulative and abusive men, obviously referring to me, although she never named me directly. She talked to mutual friends, many of whom took her side because she painted this narrative that I was a horrible husband who had used her and now was leaving her with nothing. Some friends who really knew me contacted me to hear my version, but others simply cut me off without even asking me what had happened. It was a pretty ugly period, I'm not going to lie. Isabella's lawyer didn't give up easily. They requested financial audits, tried to prove that the arrangement with my mother was fraudulent or that it had been done specifically to hide assets from Isabella, which was ridiculous considering it was done years before I met her. They even tried to drag my mother into the legal process, citing her as a witness and trying to argue that she was participating in a scheme to defraud Isabella. My mother, who's about 60 years old and is one of those ladies who doesn't let anyone intimidate her, showed up to the depositions with her own lawyer and basically made it clear to them that she was an independent businesswoman who had invested in her son's business in a completely legal manner and that Isabella had absolutely no right to her properties. Eventually, we had to go to court because there was no way to reach an agreement. Isabella kept insisting she deserved millions. I was offering to equitably divide the real marital assets, which were basically the house and shared savings. The trial was long and exhausting. Isabella's lawyer did this whole show about how she'd sacrificed her career for me, how she'd been the perfect wife supporting me while I built the business, how now she was left with nothing because of me. It was all lies. Of course, she'd quit her job by her own decision, and during the marriage she basically hadn't done anything productive, but her lawyer painted her as this martyr who had given everything for her husband. My lawyer presented the evidence of the messages between Isabella and Tyler, clearly showing that the affair had lasted months and that she'd been planning the divorce specifically to take money. We also presented all the business documentation, showing that the ownership structure had existed years before the marriage and that Isabella had never contributed in any way to the company. She hadn't even worked there or given business ideas, nothing. The judge carefully reviewed everything, heard testimonies from both sides, and finally gave his verdict. The decision was basically that Isabella had no legal right to the business or its assets because it had never been hers to begin with, and the ownership structure was completely legitimate. The house would be divided equitably, which meant we'd have to sell it and divide the profits, and the shared savings would also be divided. In total, Isabella was going to receive about $200,000, which isn't anything to sneeze at, but is very far from the millions she expected. The judge denied her petition for spousal support because she'd quit her job voluntarily and because the affair and her planning demonstrated that she hadn't acted in good faith during the marriage. Isabella was obviously furious with the verdict, but there was nothing she could do. I left court that day feeling like I'd gotten an enormous weight off my shoulders. Not only had I protected the business that had taken me 10 years to build, but I'd exposed Isabella for what she really was. I know it sounds vindictive, and it probably is a little, but after everything she tried to do to me, I don't regret anything. The last time I saw her was at the final signing of the divorce papers about 3 months ago. She didn't even look at me, just signed the documents with a bitter face and left. I don't know what happened with Tyler, if they stayed together or what. Honestly, I don't care. What matters is that I'm free. The business is safe, and I can move forward with my life without having to worry about someone planning to destroy me behind my back. Now I'm completely focused on work, which ironically is better than ever. We've landed several new contracts, and we're considering expanding to another city. My mother and I sometimes laugh about this whole situation, about how her advice from years ago ended up saving me. She always tells me to trust my instinct when it comes to people, to pay attention to the signs, and she's right. With Isabella, there were signs from the beginning that I ignored, because I wanted to believe I'd found the right person. Now I'm much more careful about who I let into my life, and I'm definitely in no rush to get married again soon, or maybe never, who knows. The truth is, this experience changed me in many ways. I became more cynical. I guess, more distrustful of people's intentions, especially when it comes to money. But it also taught me the value of planning ahead, of protecting yourself and your work, because you never know when someone is going to try to take it from you. Isabella thought she was smarter than me, that she could manipulate me and get away with it, but in the end, she was the one who didn't know who she was messing with. And now she's out there with her $200,000, which she probably already spent or shares with Tyler, while I keep building my business and my life without her. I'd say things turned out pretty well, all things considered.